We have a number of data centers across the world, but in this video, we will look at the two main headquarters across the world. That is the Amazon data center and the Microsoft Underground data center. The Amazon data center. Amazon Web Services is an unrivaled internet age colossus providing the computational horsepower that powers countless organizations ranging from Netflix to BMW, Disney, GE, Tinder, and the CIA. It is worth tens of billions of dollars per year. And if you've used the internet recently, you've most likely used Amazon Web Services without even realizing it. Join us today. In contrast to its cardboard boxes, vans, trucks, jet planes, and warehouses, we enter the belly of the beast and get a sneak peek inside the AWS data center. Amazon prefers not to brand its massive data center portfolio. However, these massive servers farms are at the heart of the company's colossal success. AWS stands for Amazon Web Services. AWS was founded in 2003 at a meeting in CEO's lakehouse. Jeff Bezos' company had just emerged victorious from the dot-com bust, but the fast-growing retailer was having difficulty setting up and rolling out its own internal server capacity. A scheme promising fast scalable server infrastructure was duly hatched, and the more enterprising young guns in the room quickly identified it. Amazon could sell it as a potential spin-off service to other companies. Fast forward to today, and AWS accounts for a whopping 60% of all Amazon profits. That equates to about $50 billion per year. If you are a startup in 2021, you don't need to invest precious capital in vast banks of noisy, expensive servers and battalions of nerds to maintain them because you're taking on another company's tech problems in the cloud. When you're busy, you just rent time on Amazon's equipment instead of the cloud. If you're quiet, hire less equipment. Amazon jealously guards the actual equipment in question. From praying eyes, even clients aren't allowed to poke around in the data centers they pay for, and the addresses aren't made public. But here's what we know so far. Take, for example, a typical site in Loudoun County, Northern Virginia, where AWS plans to run at least 50 individual data centers covering several million square feet. Whether you believe it or not, Amazon intends to increase capacity in Northern Virginia even further. For example, a 100-acre site near Dallas International Airport. According to reports, the firm just shouted out a cool $73 million for entry into one such data center. Let's say there's a huge unassuming box next to a pet resort in Sterling. The first thing we noticed is that security is AWS's top priority. There are high fences, guards, and multiple layers of intrusion detection systems, most obviously when access is granted to a small number of people for a short period of time. Two-factor authentication. Most obviously, when When access is granted to a small number of people for a short period of time, two-factor authorization is required on at least two occasions during the visit. It is extremely rare for a visit to be sanctioned. At all times, visitors are accompanied by at least one authorized member of AWS staff once they have passed through their so-called perimeter layer. The infrastructure layer is the data center's next stage. This is where critical systems such as backup power, fire suppression, and most importantly, HVAC or air conditioning are located in order to maintain market dominance. AWS data centers cannot fail for any reason because their water, power, telecommunications, and internet links are all designed with full redundancy and the ability to keep all of those servers running. To prevent overheating, as many as 80,000 servers in a single data center must be constantly monitored for temperature and humidity. If the worst happens and a fire starts, a suite of systems involving water and gaseous sprinklers systems is rigorously maintained and ready to go in a crisis beyond the infrastructure layer. And now we've arrived at the place where the real magic happens. The so-called data layer security is even tighter here, with a hidden array of intrusion detection systems and more stringed review process for anyone coming in and out. Even if something insignificant occurs, for example, an internal door is held open for a slightly longer period of time than usual, alarms have been set off. Multi-factor electronic control devices are installed at all access points. If a physical or visual if a physical or virtual data breach is even suspected, the relevant server is automatically disabled and shut down. Throughout the year, the security systems are audited. According to a thorough 26,000 According to a thorough 2,600-point checklist overseen by third parties. These external auditors have the authority to request access to anything in the data center, from routine logs to security footage and even the cameras themselves. AWS employees are sometimes pulled at random from their shifts and interviewed about topics such as media disposal, a process that adheres to stringed and robust compliance metrics. In the midst of all this hypersecurity, let's take a look at the hardware itself. It's easy to forget that AWS data centers will house 50,000 to 80,000 servers that use a total of 25 to 30 megawatts of power. It was stated that AWS could easily double this size and build even It was stated that AWS could easily double this size and build even larger data centers. However, as with everything, Amazon, it's all a matter of finely calibrated scale, distinguished engineer, and AWS VP James Hamilton told attendees at the company's reInvent conference in 2016 that increasing the number of servers and racks per center beyond a certain point no longer lowers the incremental cost. At some point, the value decreases and the costs increase. And in our opinion, This is about right. Hamilton describes the size of the data center. AWS typically hires accelerating Hamilton employees. In a much larger data center, the term blast radius is used to emphasize the impact of a failure. Despite the relatively small size, 80,000 servers are sufficient to handle, according to Hamilton, approximately 1 or 2 terabytes of data every second. The engineer also hinted that the bandwidth a the engineer also hinted that the bandwidth within the center is significantly higher than that ever evangelists for vertical integration. Amazon have made great strides in streamlining and perfecting the servers themselves over the years. Unlike other co-location server infrastructure providers, AWS has a much clearer understanding of who will be using its hardware and for what. By eliminating the need to be versatile and generalist, the company has been able to devise ever more efficient server architectures. When mundane software operations are translated on the hardware or even the silicon of the chips, it can shave nanoseconds of processing times, which makes a big difference at Amazon scale. Initially, AWS purchased services off the shelf from traditional suppliers, but over time, the company gradually began developing its own single depth service exquisitely optimized for airflow in AWS buildings. Initially, AWS purchased services off the shelf from traditional suppliers, but over time, the company gradually began developing its own single depth service exquisitely optimized for airflow in AWS buildings running AWS software. Since acquiring Israeli from Annapurna, AWS has even developed its own Graviton chipset, which uses the power efficient architecture. These Graviton chips are currently in their second generation, with a third on the way. This marks a departure from long term Amazon partner Intel and its x86 architecture, and is expected to provide AWS clients with 40% better price performance, essentially putting supercomputer level power in the hands of regular commercial users. In terms of storage, a single standard sized racket and AWS Center can hold 11 petabytes. That's a million gigabytes of data on 11 That's a million gigabytes of data on 1,100 desks multiplied by thousands of times and spread across hundreds of data centers all over the world. When it comes to science, AWS routers are the way to go. Custom ASICs or application specific integrated circuits that support 28 ports and 25 gigabit Ethernet connectivity can be used by children. This deviates from the industry standard 10 gigabit Ethernet and 40 gigabit Ethernet at networking speeds. However, according to James Hamilton, when paired together at 50 gigabit Ethernet networking between data centers is essential to provide security and backup. The critical client data is transmitted over Amazon's own private 100 gigabit Ethernet network, which connects the vast AWS global network's 25 international regions and 80 so-called availability zones. AWS has its own private undersea cable system, But returning to our data center, cooling is our top priority. And in order to minimize environmental impact, AWS specifically in Loudoun County, Virginia, set out to use as much reclaimed water as possible. This prevents the company from monopolizing all the valuable local drinking water, which would obviously be a PR nightmare. Loudoun Water. The local utility is happy to provide this reclaimed water at a competitive rate, and AWS pays significant taxes in this area. But it's worth noting that AWS has installed its own on site water treatment systems elsewhere. This prevents pipes from becoming clogged with mineral sediment, resulting in costly inconvenience and delay. If you think that's crazy, consider this. The company has begun developing its own power substations. All of those servers consume a lot of power. So rather than awaiting for slow moving traditional power companies to build infrastructure in order to help all those vital racks running at all cost, AWS simply built electric substations itself. Some of X technicians have described the data center's day-to-day operations as resembling an ER department for computers with that much hardware. When things see up, stop pinging, or require reboot, fault finding and upgrading equipment is left to a small army of techs who follow meticulously drilled playbooks that cover almost every convincible eventuality metrics are set by supervisors, encouraging everyone. When Dink sees up, stop pinging or require a reboot, fault finding and upgrading equipment is left to a small army of techs who follow meticulously drilled playbooks that cover almost every convincible eventuality metrics are set by supervisors, encouraging tasks must be completed quickly and efficiently by teams. Some have complained that the working environment is cold and that it will undoubtedly be very noisy in the future. More even louder More and even louder is to be expected. AWS data centers will be operational beginning in early 2020. Every 3 months, a new AWS center with a footprint of around 1 million square feet opens in North. More and even louder is to be expected. AWS data centers will be operational beginning More and even louder is to be expected. AWS data centers will be operational beginning in early 2020. More and even louder is to be expected. AWS data centers have been operational since the beginning of 2020. Every 3 months, a new AWS center with a footprint of around 1 million square feet opens in the Northern Virginia area alone. And that's just one aspect of it. It's a number game, to say the least. What are your thoughts about the massive data center? Get enough credit or underpinning? What are your thoughts about the massive data center? What are your thoughts about the massive data center on Amazon? What are your thoughts about the Amazon massive data center? Let us know down in the comment section below.